Again, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. And in addition to the folks in this room, we have a lot of people joining us remotely as well. We have people that are watching us on a live stream, and also people that are participating in the conversation over Twitter. You can see our hashtag there, hashtag election14. We have students who will be watching us from Houston and Brownwood, Victoria, Texas, Weslaco, San Antonio, St. Mary's University just joined us today, even in Washington, D.C. So we're really thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with you all. The Annette Strauss Institute is a research unit here in the Moody College of Communication, and we are dedicated to understanding and overcoming the obstacles to civic engagement. And we do that through research, like our Texas Civic Health Index released last year, that sheds some light on today's or yesterday's turnout figures. I'll be talking about that a little bit in a couple of minutes. And also through our educational programming and outreach, like this event today. So again, welcome. Let me tell you what we believe in at the Annette Strauss Institute. We believe that unfortunately we live in an era of declining faith in the political process and in our political institutions. And that despite that declining faith, campaigns and elections are not only necessary and inevitable, but they are good for us. As citizens, they're good for the candidates, they're good for government if they are conducted well and robustly with robust public participation. So we believe that a desperately needed antidote to that declining faith today is to get more people rekindled in their interest, their curiosity, and their passion for democracy and for how our political process works. And that's what motivates us today. So our goals for today's event is that we could help all of you here and all of you listening and joining in remotely to think about our political process and our political institutions, to think about what happened in yesterday's election in a more multifaceted and realistic way, and to hear from a variety of viewpoints and a variety of voices about what this election means and what it will mean for us going forward. To give voice to multiple perspectives is a big part of what we're about. So we hope that today will be lively, engaging, even provocative. But at the same time, what we hope to do today is to demonstrate that even during campaigns, even as the parties and the candidates can fight it out furiously sometimes against one another, that the day after the election, we, as much as possible, we put that aside and we put the people first. The people of the state, the people of this democracy first. So that's our goal for today. So I have to say a quick and very heartfelt thank you to our sponsors and donors, including the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation, which is really making this event and so much of the New Politics Forum possible. And also for HEB, we're very, very grateful for their continued support of our work and our outreach. And also, of course, to the Moody College of Communication. And I have to say a big heartfelt thank you to the fabulous staff of the Annette Strauss Institute, including Emily Einson and Ann Staling and everybody else that you'll see, or maybe that you won't see today. But this event is purely the result of their dedication and their creativity and their passion for civic engagement. So thank you very much. Good, thank you. So, as you know, you can join the conversation online. You can use our hashtag to join into our Twitter stream. Please use the hashtag election14. And we will have social media correspondents right over here who will be following the online conversation and allowing you to get involved in the conversation. In fact, we're going to try a unique set of ways of getting you involved in our discussions today. So for those of you in the audience, you'll see in your program cards like this. I think this is where I'm supposed to do this. You'll see cards like this that you can fill out, and we'll have kind of people roving the aisles and collecting these cards from you. And this is your opportunity to pose a question at the moment that it occurs to you and not have to wait for a microphone to open up. So this is really, when you think of it, fill out the card just as is shown up there. I think I filled one out here to myself apparently. And hold that up, wave it, and somebody will collect it from you. They'll pass it on to the moderator at some point during our conversation. So our watch party participants actually have also been invited to submit questions via videos that we hope to be sharing with you during the program. And then the participants that are watching live online are invited to submit their questions via Twitter. And again, the social media correspondents will be sorting through those for us. So, pardon me, my humble fingers here. So I want to talk with you a little bit today about the context for yesterday's election. And I want to talk a little bit about why we are doing a debriefing of this midterm election. Of course, we're here because we do want to talk about who won and who lost and how they won and how they lost, because that's an important process. But you get a lot of that already. If you pay attention to the media at all, you're going to get a lot of that kind of analysis. So we really want to go above and beyond. We don't want to just talk about what happened yesterday, but we want to talk about the future, about tomorrow. And we want to, again, get our attention not just on politics narrowly defined, but on civic engagement broadly defined. And one thing I'll be talking a little bit about for the next few minutes is a civic engagement crisis, if you will, that exists here in Texas. And yesterday's very low turnout figures are part of the evidence, part of the symptom of that crisis in civic health in Texas. So let's begin with a simple thought. Elections are going to happen. They're always going to happen. But the quality of the election depends on who shows up. What the people that we elect, what they are able to do as a result, depends on who shows up to express their will. The mandate that those who govern will gather from an election can only come from who shows up. So elections are kind of, if you will, an imperfect way of measuring the will of the people. And they get less and less perfect the fewer and fewer people who show up. So really, in a way, elections are all about who shows up. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about who showed up yesterday. A lot of you might have been following this. Anybody followed this yesterday? This was the I voted button on Facebook. Anybody click that button yesterday? There was this cool online graphic that you could watch as people were clicking the I voted button. It gave a sense of excitement, and I was checking in with that, throughout the day. So it gave a sense nationally that there was a lot of excitement, and at a certain point they were the good people at Facebook were reporting that about 358,000 people per hour or more were clicking on that button. But here in Texas, maybe not so much was going on. Part of what I have to talk about, of course, is that it wasn't just what happened yesterday. Actually, we saw a continued trend in the increase in early voting, so that we had about a third of Texas registered voters actually voted before yesterday. They took advantage of early voting. So another source of excitement perhaps around the election. But what we saw was continued pretty low voter turnout. In last year's Texas Civic Health Index, we reported that unfortunately, Texas ranked in the 2010 midterm elections dead last in the country, behind every other state and Washington, D.C., in self-reported rates of voter turnout. Well, I'm here to tell you that the early returns suggest that Texas was not dead last yesterday. We were just next to dead last. Now, this is based on a different data set, slightly different denominator. This is the United States Elections Project, a political scientist named Michael McDonald, who's been running these figures for many, many years. But his best estimate is that only Indiana was behind us. And actually, one of our speakers for today, Josh Skacko, that you'll be hearing from later, just flew in from Indiana. So congratulations on having lower turnout. He reports that it was raining yesterday. It was raining, and there was no top of the ticket race, right? In Texas, by contrast, as you know, not only did we have a gubernatorial race, a lieutenant governor's race, an attorney general's race, we had more open seats yesterday in the state of Texas, I just learned this morning, since 1906. We've never seen so many open seats. Or at least that's what they told me, the good people at the Texas Tribune this morning at their conversation that they did at the Austin Club this morning. So we had a really historic opportunity for voter engagement, but we saw it unmet, if you will. So if we look at demographics, I have to give you a big caveat and say that this was put together diligently but under a little bit of time pressure this afternoon with imperfect data. But this is our best guess on who actually voted compared to their proportion of the population of the state of Texas. So one way of thinking about this is which groups are showing up and representing themselves. Which groups are overrepresenting themselves, so to speak, not a bad thing necessarily, but which groups are underrepresenting themselves. And once again, we see that young people in Texas are underrepresented in terms of voting. We also see that in terms of race and ethnicity, the white population, the Caucasian population in Texas, very robust voter turnout, but look at the figures for the Hispanic and Latino population in Texas. Really, really underrepresented. Roughly half of the folks who could have participated in that demographic actually did so. And in terms of education, we see a very familiar pattern. This is not necessarily unique to Texas, but that education really tends to matter in terms of who turns out to vote. So as you move up the rungs of education, you tend to get more civically engaged. And what that means is that the very large numbers of people in Texas who have only a high school diploma or have less than a high school diploma, those folks are really pretty dramatically underrepresented or underrepresenting themselves at the polling booth. So this really fits with a pattern that we have seen and that we reported in the Texas Civic Health Index, a pattern of low political participation. As you see here in this graphic, Texas has lagged behind the national average in voter turnout for many, many years, since 1972, the earliest point at which we have this kind of comprehensive data. And in fact, we've been on average about 5 percentage points below the national average in this state. This is interesting to note for a couple of reasons. One is that this appears to be the pattern even in years when we had a Texan on the ballot for the presidential election, which has happened a few times. And it's also noteworthy because it is such a consistent pattern, right? So, and the other thing I would note about that is that this predates, for those of you who are concerned just about one-party dominance in this state, this predates the current era of Republican Party dominance and goes back to the era when you still had Democratic Party predominance in our elections in Texas. So in other words, there's something about Texas, there's something about a culture of participation here that has been longstanding in this state. It's an interesting puzzle, and it of course extends to midterm elections. Non-presidential years are always lower voter turnout years, but that's true and especially true here in Texas. So as you can see, the low turnout that we saw yesterday is part and parcel of a pattern in which we had in the last midterm election just over a third of eligible Texans saying that they actually voted. So in that particular midterm election in 2010, many, many sitting members of our state legislature were chosen. Either they were re-elected or they were elected for the first time by a third, essentially. A third of the people that could have shown up to choose our elected leadership. So it of course raises lots and lots and lots of questions, right, about why. Why? If everything is bigger in Texas, why has our political participation consistently been pretty low compared to other states? I won't pretend to have all the answers to that question for you, but let me suggest some things that we all should be and could be talking about much more as a way of grappling with this problem of low civic engagement in Texas. And I'm going to focus here in particular on young people for two reasons. That's what we do at the Annette Strauss Institute. That's one of our main focal areas is young people like most of you sitting here, but also because these are the formative years for civic engagement habits. When people are in their high school and their college years, this is when people are finding their way, figuring out who they are and what they believe, and they're forming habits of citizenship. And so it's really a sort of a crucial time in people's lives to develop them as active, engaged citizens. So what do we know about why people don't participate more? If you think about it, picture that moment of actually casting your ballot, and then begin to back up from that moment and think about all of the things that go into creating active and informed citizens. As we like to say at the Institute, informed and engaged citizens are not born, they are made. They are made by a whole set of society, structures, family involvement, churches and other organizations, public schools and other schools, all of the ways in which we bring ourselves up to be active and engaged citizens. So again, thinking about that moment of voting, what had to happen in order for you to be there at the ballot box casting your vote? Obviously, you have to be registered, you have to understand how to get registered, you have to do it successfully, and you have to now have the proper identification in Texas. Those are important topics. They're topics that we'll actually talk more about today. What do we know about how voter ID, for example, might be affecting voter turnout here in Texas? But let me suggest that those are far from the only hurdles or obstacles or challenges or things that we need to be looking at and talking about in order to understand political participation in Texas. There's a simple matter of things like knowing where to vote, which turns out to be more of a challenge than you might think. Now, here in Travis County, we are fortunate that we've decided that you should be able on election day to go to any election polling place to vote. But of course, it's not that way in most of Texas. But there's also other issues of information that are much more challenging, potentially. You have to be able to understand the ballot. How many of you looked at yesterday's ballot and went, right? Holy cow, that was a long ballot. There was a lot of information to sort through. And so understanding how to read the ballot, how to make sense of it, and how to cast an informed vote for every single one of those races, let's be honest. How many of you have ever skipped a particular checkbox on your ballot because you didn't feel informed enough to vote? I know I have, right? That's not uncommon. In fact, as we know, there's this typical pattern of a kind of drop-off, right? A lot of people may cast a ballot for the gubernatorial race, for example, but then they won't necessarily vote in the lower races. Or what was the figure that I heard today? Something like 14,000, I had it here somewhere, something like 14,000 people who didn't take part in the larger ballot but voted on some of our proposition measures on the ballot. Maybe because those seem a little easier to understand because it's a yes or a no. But when you get to the level further down the ballot, particularly as we had in Austin this time around, where we had brand new geographic districts and we had, 78 candidates, right, running for these local city council seats. That's a tremendous informational challenge for voters. So the point here is simply that in the United States, not necessarily just in Texas, but in the United States, the informational bar is set pretty high for voters. We ask people to vote a lot, to vote often, and to vote in many kinds of races, for many kinds of candidates, and for issues. And that all requires a certain level of preparedness. And I can tell you, at least anecdotally, over the years of teaching, that the young people that I teach tell me again and again that one of the biggest reasons that they don't vote consistently is that they don't feel informed enough, right? So that's why one of the challenges is this informational challenge, and it's something that we work hard on at the Annette Strauss Institute. But what else? It's not just the individual taking the initiative to get better informed. That's obviously important. But it's also the candidates and the campaigns reaching out to the voters. So there seems to be pretty good evidence that, again, not just here in Texas, but nationally, we get caught in a bit of a vicious circle where the candidates and campaigns don't reach out to the groups that they think aren't going to show up to vote. So the groups that don't get reached out to don't show up and don't vote. Repeat. And that is a repeat pattern with many groups in our society, especially young people. So young people, I think, often feel as though nobody's talking to them, that this campaign or this election isn't about them. It isn't about the issues that they care about. Is it any surprise then that they don't show up in greater numbers? If they don't feel invited into the conversation, if they don't feel like there are compelling candidates that are trying to understand them and their concerns, or that they can relate to somehow. So campaigns and candidates are part of the equation of low voter engagement as well. And then of course we know that for many young people these days particularly, there's not as much of a strong connection to political parties, to those traditional political identities of Democrat and Republican. It's not that those don't exist anymore. They're still a vital part of our democracy. But increasingly, the survey data show that young people are not necessarily as comfortable with those party labels as their elders, are less likely to identify as Democrat or Republican or even with another party like Green or Libertarian, that they're much more likely to, they want to sort of construct their own political and social identities as they see fit and not be kind of fit into a predetermined party or category. And so what this means is that it may be issues that are particularly compelling for young people. Young people may not speak the language of political party, but they do need to find the issues and find the candidates and the campaigns that are talking about those issues that they care about. So connecting with issues is an important part of this recipe for greater civic engagement. Then, of course, backing up even further from that moment of voting, you're never going to walk into the polling place in the first place. You're certainly not going to stand in line and wait, like I think I waited 45 minutes at my polling place last night. You're not going to do that if you don't believe your vote matters. And one of the most concerning things to show up in the Texas Civic Health Index data that we released last year is the high percentage of Texans who said they didn't vote, and the reason they didn't vote is that they really didn't know if their vote counted. They didn't know if their vote mattered. They really didn't feel interested. Now, those responses, that's a wide array of responses. For some people, it may just be, politics, I don't understand it. I don't know what's interesting about it. But for a lot of people, it may be this sense that somehow they're not sure that their vote matters. If you don't believe your vote matters, you'll never walk into the polling place. And so it seems to us vitally important that we figure out what is it that people mean when they say they don't think their vote will matter. What are they concerned about? And how can that be addressed? How can we begin a conversation about whatever it is that's making people lose the sense that their vote actually matters? And then you can't see my last bullet point there, I'm just realizing. But overall, what's really, really important is that people develop the habits of active citizen engagement. One of the clearest pieces of evidence from all the research that's been done is that young people who grow up in families that read the newspaper or watch the news or talk about the news regularly, people who grow up in families where the parents are civically and politically involved, those people are very likely to go on to become very engaged themselves. But for the increasing numbers of young people who are growing up in households where the parents don't vote, the parents don't talk about politics, the parents don't pay attention to the news, those young people face that additional challenge, right? They've got all these other kinds of hurdles to overcome in order to be active citizens, and it's not being modeled for them at home. And so that's one reason at the Institute that we work doubly hard to try to reach young people in high school and even in middle school with programs that will help them develop the habit of active citizenship. Because we know that that's where these patterns begin, the thing that will carry you into the polling place on election day. So probably this might have all raised more questions for you than it's actually answered, but I hope that I've helped to set the tone a little bit and the frame for our many interesting discussions that we're going to have today. We're really, really excited about the amazing lineup of people that we have to speak with you today and to give you their perspective on what happened yesterday and how it matters